negative thoughts in your mind that you aren't good enough, that you'll never be successful? If so, you're not alone. I've had those thoughts playing in my mind ever since I took the leap to become an entrepreneur. It's a dirty, dark secret that no one likes to talk about, as the glamorization of becoming an entrepreneur is shown in the media. I realized that in order to succeed, I needed help. We all do. So I decided to go all in on myself, spending thousands of hours in the trenches, reading, joining groups, listening to podcasts, hiring coaches to develop a bulletproof morning routine for success. Join me on my journey as together we build our morning fire to ignite our lives as entrepreneurs. My name is Jeff Wickersham, and this is the Morning Fire for Entrepreneurs podcast. Welcome to the Morning Fire for Entrepreneurs podcast and show. I am extremely excited to have Brandon Lucero back on the show. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be the first returning guest. It's an honor, so thank you.
The first returning guest. So if you love what Brandon's talking about today, be sure to go back and listen to episode 114. That was the first time he was on the show. So excited to have him back. Let's get into state real quick so we can have a great discussion on messaging, as well as the tremendous launch that you just recently had. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 3 power breaths in through the belly, up through the chest. And we're going to raise our hands above our head as we do it. Let's go ahead and breathe in and out. Good. Another breath in and out. Final breath in and out. Now I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. I know you might have young ones sleeping, so you don't have to scream, but I'm going to scream boom, get the energy level up in 3, 2, 1, and boom. There you go. Brandon is West Coast and his kids are younger, so they might be sleeping. My sons might be upstairs listening and they're woken up. So that is a good thing.
So much.
So Brandon, I know I had you on the show last time. We talked about kind of your go-to morning habit ritual. I want to shift that question now to, in the past year, what was one failure that you had and some lessons learned from it? Because I think it's so important to learn from our failures.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before the show, and there's been a lot, and I think it's really important for people to realize is, like, when you ask me this question, my mind automatically goes to like this one. Which one do I share? And I think where we're at in business now, the biggest lesson or mistake that I've made has come to team, and we've been growing our business and scaling our business, but learning how to let go, not micromanage, trust, and embrace mistakes has been one of the biggest things I've learned. But that came from obviously a failure, which is not trusting the team, micromanaging the team, and hiring people for a certain job but not letting them do the job. And there were times where it got emotional with the team, like my COO, my integrator, the person who basically runs my business, like had to like sit me down and go, you are getting in my way. You're not trusting. You say you're doing these things, but you're not. And that I had to really look at myself in the mirror and change. And that's the beginning of the year when we went into our biggest launch ever. And, we invested at least $250,000 into this launch. And so when you invest that amount of money, you want to make sure everything is in order. Everything is, the right is happening. It's correct. And by doing that, you actually hurt the team because they can't do what they're good at. And for me, that was the biggest learning lesson heading into that launch, our biggest launch of the year. And that was probably my biggest mistake and kind of failure that I had this year.
Gotcha. And so that was obviously probably a difficult conversation to have with your COO. How did you absorb it? Right. I go through a process when I hear feedback, right? Sometimes the ego will kick in and I always like to take some time to disconnect and really think through it. How did you go through that process?
Yeah. I mean, well, to me, entrepreneurship really is a self-development game. So I believe to my core that your success inside of business is how much you grow as an individual. And I can talk about that for an hour. Like, it's so important. So to even get to the level that we're at now, which is a multi 7-figure level, I've already had to do years of just work and adjusting and tweaking. So when I heard it, it was, it was, it didn't hurt the ego. It was just kind of like, okay, great. I understand. But the changing of the habit was the hardest thing to change, because that's just the way I've been operating for 5 years or 8 years, I guess, because that's how long I've been in business. So when you've been operating a certain way for 8 years and then all of a sudden have to like literally switch it overnight because you're in the middle of a launch, that's when it becomes difficult, because sometimes habits take a while to break out of. So that was the hardest thing, is like just sitting there and like having to just shut your mouth and be quiet and just like not say anything and just watch. But more specifically, even watch when they were making a mistake and you knew they were making a mistake, or I guess thought they were going to be making a mistake, and letting them learn the lessons. That was the hardest part. And so it was basically just having restraint and just knowing, like a deep understanding and knowing that at the end of the day, everything will be okay. And just, it took a lot of trust. Like you just, it's, that's what entrepreneurship is, right? You have to like walk off the cliff and hope the net appears all the time. And it took a lot of that.
Love it. And I love what you said related to entrepreneurship and the connection with self-development, personal development, and growth, right? That your business is only going to grow as much as you grow as a person. And I'm
Yep.
sure we could talk shop for multiple hours on
Sure.
on that subject. So let's get into, you had the biggest launch, $1.5 million launch this year.
Yep.
Trusting your team, investing $250K into that launch.
Yeah.
What were a couple lessons that you learned throughout that process? Obviously, you went all in, right?
Right. Yeah. So I would say the first one is like the trusting of the team, but to talk about specifics of that, there was a lot of things that we had to do. So number one is the video series. So the video series was the style of launch we did, which is where you show, 4 or 5 videos and you kind of teach and educate, you shift perspective, you create demand. But this was, in my opinion, it was probably is one of the best, if not the best video series in our industry. And it took us 4 months to create. Like if you took all the time that we put in, and we have a team of probably 6 people working on it, taking 6 months of, or 4 months of 6 people's time, it was a lot. And so I've never created something like that. So I had to completely trust that the team understood my vision for it. They knew what they were doing. I mean, this thing, like when I wrote the scripts and I got it back, it was like a book. And they wrote out each paragraph, like here's the lens we're going to use, here's the shot, here's the location. So we're not just going to one location and shooting one video. It was like, we're going to one location and we're going to be here for 9 hours, and we're going to shoot a paragraph from this video and a paragraph from this video and a paragraph over here and a paragraph over here. And you need to memorize all of it. And I had no idea what this thing was going to look like. I just know we shot for 9 days full time in a row and just hope that this thing was going to turn out great. And if it didn't, I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. But trusting of the team in that aspect with the video series, trusting that our Facebook ads were going to be fine when we're spending $250,000, trusting that my integrator, who's never done a launch to this level, can handle it. So the biggest lesson for me is just trusting that our team was prepared for it, trusting that I've been a good enough CEO and mentor to them to get them to that level as well. And that's one of the other shifts and lessons that I had to learn, is being a CEO really means being a mentor. Like,
Okay.
Like you really have to mentor the team, and you have to be that example of how they are supposed to show up as leaders as well. On our podcast, we just did an episode about letting go.
Okay.
And what I started to realize, and I talked to Matt, who is my creative director, after the launch, is what he told me is like, I really had to let go as well during this launch. I had the vision, like I knew your vision. I had a vision for the video series, but then we had our editors, and we had Jackie, who's like kind of like the integrator to the creative side of the business. And I had to let go of my expectations, but he's like, I knew how to do that because that's what I saw you do throughout the launch, is to continue to let go. So those are kind of the biggest lessons, I would say, is learning how to let go, trusting the team, and honestly, just embracing mistakes. Like I realized there's nothing really that my team could do that's going to like bring down the business unless they were intentionally trying to bring down the business. Like there's nothing they're going to do that's going to like bring it down. And that's because we have so many people and so much momentum. And yeah, it was just a complete letting go of like, all right, here we go. Jumped off the cliff. Let's see if this net appears. But I would say those are probably the biggest lessons for sure.
Love it. And that video series, if you're watching this live or recording in the next week, it's still out there. You're actually doing it again, correct?
Yeah, it's up and it'll be up. I don't know when everyone's listening, but for like the next 10 days. So like pretty much the end of August, it'll be up, and maybe the beginning of September.
Awesome. So where can they find that at?
You can just head over to our Instagram. I am Brandon Lucero, and we have links and stuff all over there. You can also just go to brandonlucero.com/video series, and you can register for it and go check it out.
I highly recommend it. I checked it out last time you released it. Professional. I mean, well done. Really loved it. So kudos to those, those 9 days that you put in. It definitely showed in the series.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into kind of shifting perspective and messaging, because I feel like messaging is such a vital piece, and so many people miss the mark there on messaging. And obviously, I've been listening to Brandon's podcast, and the podcast is called New Generation Entrepreneur. It's been great to hear some of the lessons and the tips you get in there, because there's strategies that you can apply. And so many times it's a how-to video, right? They're everywhere, right? You speak to that a little bit. So, what are a couple of strategies people can use from a messaging perspective to really get into the minds of their potential customer as they are a business owner, entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I can go so many different directions with this, but let me start here. When most entrepreneurs go online and they try to create content, what they do is they teach their expertise. And that typically comes into the form of more information and tutorials and things like that. And it makes sense, right? We're experts. The thing is I don't want to be an expert in a sea of experts. And so what most people do is they just teach their expertise because they're an expert. And then they try to figure out, how do I make myself different than everyone else? But the problem is you're still an expert. You're still an expert in a sea of experts. And like, if you just make one small tweak, or you are a little bit better in this way, that's fine. But it's just a matter of time before all the other experts catch up to you. Gotcha. And so you have to snap out of this idea of using tutorials and more information and expertise in order to grow an audience or to create demand. It's kind of like the difference between an encyclopedia and a TED Talk. Like, both can be super engaging, both can be super educational, but only one of them is really entertaining. Right. And that's a TED Talk. And it's the same reason you don't see encyclopedias topping the charts of the best-selling list, any of them. But you see perspective shifting books, like books that still educate and teach, but they get people to see something differently. They help you end a belief that's causing you suffering. And most people don't tap into that. However, when you tap into that, you're still an expert, but you're also in your own field because you have your own IP, your own intellectual property. You have your own perspective. This is where thought leadership starts to come in. And so when we talk about content and messaging, we look at a couple different things. We look at, how do we build an actual, real, authentic communication at the deep level, like on a psychological level. How is connection actually created, and how do we put that into content? Number two is, how do we then create content that does shift perspective, that does communicate differently than what everyone else is used to? And then how do we educate differently? Again, when we look at TED Talks, they're not tutorials. When you listen to like Gary Vaynerchuk or Simon Sinek talk, they do give education, but it's never in the form of a step-by-step tutorial. Like, why is that? Why are they not doing that? Because they want to tap into this thing that I'm talking about. So if we look at connection, I want everyone listening to like think of your best friend. Think of who they are. Think of why you like them. And I'm willing to bet right now that you have either a shared value, you have a shared identity, or you have a shared belief. Or maybe all three. But I almost promise you that your best friend is not someone who has opposite beliefs, opposite values, and opposite identities to you. Like right now, most of the people we hang out with and our closest friends are parents. And that happens to be one of my strongest identities. Also, there's a lot of parents that have different values and beliefs than I do, but I'm typically not friends with them. I'm typically friends with the ones that have similar values and beliefs. And the thing is that connection, it doesn't happen on a logical level. I didn't sit down and go, okay, let me create a checklist of who I want in a friend, and then let me go out and hunt that person. No, I meet them and then we feel whether or not we like them. We feel a connection. So if we're forming friendships that way, why aren't we doing that with content? Why aren't we doing that with messaging? And it's very simple. All you need to do is integrate core values, integrate some of your identities, not all of them, but also integrate some of your beliefs. And that will start to form a connection through your content. And then when you integrate the perspective shifting content like thought reversals, you start to stand out because you kind of go against the grain a little bit. You're saying things that people aren't used to. It doesn't need to be super polarizing. It can be curiosity driven as well. But now we have those two elements kind of working together. And then the last piece is educational. And we do still want some tutorials, not a lot, but we want some. But we also want to be able to educate differently than what we're used to. We want to educate kind of like how Simon Sinek does. This is education through story. This is education through, again, shifting perspective. And I find that when you combine all three of these elements, you create this effect. And this effect of builds the know, like, and trust, but it also creates demand because there's ways to integrate your unique solution into your educational content. So when you have all these elements together, people just will, some of the things that we've experienced is people DMing us like, how do we work with you? And they have no idea. They have no idea if we sell a course, a service, a coaching program, a download PDF, a retreat, a mastermind. They have no idea what we sell, but they know that they want our methodology. They know they want our unique solution. They know they want to work with me. So we get DMs all the time like, how do we work with you? How do we work with you? Well, that's because of this effect that we've created with our messaging. And that's what we help people with. And that's what the video series was all about.
That's awesome and tremendous value. And I love how you took us through that process. And one thing I pulled out was ending a belief that is causing suffering.
Yeah.
Right. And so many people, let's be honest, with COVID and everything that has happened, the economics, the political, there are a lot of people out there suffering. So how do you tap into that based upon your values, your identities, your beliefs, and really move people to feel? I think that was the other piece that I really grabbed from what you were saying.
Yeah, totally. So let's go with let's talk about the subconscious mind first.
Okay.
And this is more of like a communication style that you want to integrate. So I always say there's three things that need to happen. We need to get the eyeballs on us, then we need to keep the eyeballs on us, and then we need to create demand. So if we want to keep the eyeballs on us, we actually have to communicate differently. This is part of what Simon Sinek does. Gary Vaynerchuk does this very well. A lot of the best-selling books do this very well. There's a lot of different patterns that you can use, but there's one that I call backing it up. And it's very simple. Anytime you state something, you use an example to back up and to show that what you just said was true, or there is some truth in it. And I've actually used it in this episode already. So when I said something like, Simon Sinek, Gary Vaynerchuk, what I was saying was there's other ways to stand out besides tutorials. Look at Gary Vaynerchuk. What I did in that moment was gave an example that the subconscious mind will go, oh my gosh, yeah, he doesn't use tutorials. And so I didn't require the audience to think about whether or not they believe me. So I'm always giving these examples. You can also use metaphors. So when I used the encyclopedia versus TED Talk earlier in this episode, that was me stating something and then using a metaphor or analogy to back up. And what this does is it allows the subconscious mind to go, yes, that makes sense, without requiring you to think. And it doesn't take a lot of time. You just have to do a little bit of research before you film a piece of content. And once you have your examples, you can use them over and over and over again. But when we get to the beliefs, this one can get a little tricky because we want to find beliefs. There's two different beliefs that you want to tackle. One is what I call industry norms. So when I look at myself as a thought leader, what do thought leaders do? They go into their space and they change it. They make it better. They improve it. So in order to improve it, we have to figure out where is it broken. And when we look at where is it broken, we look for what I call industry norms. What are things that people think are normal, but are actually hurting them, causing them problems? What is outdated that people don't realize yet? So for me, I looked at our industry and I started realizing that people are doing how-to content all the time. And that worked because there weren't a lot of competitors, a lot of competition. So really
Right.
they were the only choice. But now there's thousands of competitors for most online businesses. So when there's thousands of competitors and you're all doing how-to content and you're all titling a video, how to lose 10 pounds and your weight loss coach, it doesn't matter how good you are or how much of an expert you are, because the audience, all they see is another video titled how to lose 10 pounds. They aren't even getting to your content to even watch it. So this belief that all we need to do is give everything away for free, do more and more tutorials, more how-to, is an industry norm that is outdated, that people still believe is the right way to do things. So what I do is I go in and I say the opposite. I say how-to content could be potentially the worst thing to do to grow an audience. How-to content might be why you're stuck. And because I'm going against the grain, I get eyeballs on me, right? Then because I know how to communicate the right way, then I keep the eyeballs on me. And then I know how to integrate my unique solution so then I can create demand. So we have to identify industry norms, limiting beliefs. And there's one thing that you have to do inside of these videos or messaging or podcasts or whatever it is to shift perspective. And that is your focus has to be on showing how that belief is flawed. So what I like to do, like if we were going to do a video, I would literally title it how-to content is not how to grow an audience fast. That's polarizing and gets eyeballs on me. If you don't want to be so aggressive, you can frame it in a question. So I would put something like, is how-to content really the best content to grow an audience fast? Question mark. And that's way less aggressive. It's curiosity driven. I personally like being way more aggressive in my messaging and just rocking the boat a little bit more, but not everyone does. So anyways, I would say like how-to content is one of the worst pieces of content you could use if you want to grow your audience fast. But then we have to live in compassion, because you have to understand like people's beliefs are their reality. So when you go and you say something that's against the grain, shakes up the reality, they're going to want to resist, and we don't want resistance. So we live in compassion, and you say something like, look, I understand why you believe that. There's so many people telling you that. There's so many gurus saying that. So I understand it. It's totally fine. Like, don't freak out. And then I move it to the discredit. And this discredit has to be done correctly. You have to discredit the belief. So I would say something like, look at Gary Vaynerchuk. He grew faster than anyone has and ever will, probably. And he doesn't use a single tutorial step-by-step video. Why is that?
Right.
And in one sentence, I completely disassembled that entire belief that they had. And I mean, there's 16 patterns you can use. They're called sleight of mouth patterns. That's one of them. I'll give you one more, and that's what I call counterexample. One more is chunking up. So if someone had a belief of working hard means I will be successful, all I have to say in one sentence is, so does that mean everyone who works hard is successful then? And then in one line, they're like, oh, no.
Right.
And that's chunking up, because if someone has a belief is never true 100% of the time, because they're not truths. So if you ask them, is this true 100% of the time? Like what I did, is every single person who worked hard become successful? The answer is always going to be no. So it's a very easy way to disassemble that belief. But here's what's great about this is, as soon as you disassemble or dismantle or discredit their belief, it automatically creates demand for them to want to know what the solution is. And if you have the solution in one sentence, you just create a demand for what you do. So like with Gary Vaynerchuk, for example, what I do is I teach pretty much what Gary's doing, what Simon Sinek is doing, what are these thought leaders are doing. So when I use Gary as a counterexample and I prove that belief wrong, I'm really creating demand for what I do. And then I can just finish it up with, so what does Gary do? Well, he shifts perspective. How do you do that? Well, let me show you. And then now I can start to get into some of the educational pieces. So I know that was a lot. Does that all make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I love how you took us through that exercise and using examples and metaphors to get into the subconscious mind, and instantly you are believing it, right? Because you're using another example or another metaphor. So that was incredibly powerful to take us through that journey. So I really appreciate that, Brandon.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So where can people find you if they've gone through this podcast and they said, "Oh, Brandon knows what he's talking about"? Obviously, with a $1.5 million launch, you do know what you're talking about. Where can people find you and follow you?
Yeah, I think Instagram's probably the best place.
Okay.
The handle is Iambrandonlucero. That's Lucero. We also have a ton of YouTube content, but I would say if you really want to learn even more than what I kind of touched on today and this whole messaging thing and content thing, I think our podcast is probably the best place because we have so much stuff on there, and it's the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. So we're everywhere: iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you can listen to a podcast, we're there.
Awesome, Brandon. Thank you. Thank you again for being a return guest and being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, everyone. Rise, fight, love, repeat. Get after it, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Morning Fire for Entrepreneurs podcast. You now have the knowledge, but without action, knowledge is useless. Choose to act. Choose to step into your greatness and unlock that hero inside of you. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave a review so more entrepreneurs can hear this message. If you absolutely love this podcast, which I hope you do, then share it up with someone you know who might see benefit from it. Become that beacon of change, and together we can impact the world.